So I am delighted to welcome colleagues from Ofgem, National Grid Electricity Transmission, UKPN and Cadent. So we'll have a full brief of context from a regulator's perspective and insight into what transmission and distribution networks are doing in this area and the approach has been undertaken across the industry. So we have with us today Eilidh Alexander, who, as it says there, Senior Manager from the Rio ED2 team at Ofgem, Carolyn Gardner from National Grid Electricity Transmission, we have Mark Norman from UK Power Networks, and Dave Goldsmith from Cadent. So each speaker will have 5 to 10 minutes to provide an overview of their perspectives, and then we'll have 30 minutes question and answers. And again, we'd invite you all to participate in the conversation and post questions in the chat. So that's perfect. So without further ado, can I introduce Eilidh, please?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Denise, for that intro and for having me today. As Denise says, my name is Eilidh Alexander. I'm a Senior Manager in the Rio Electricity Distribution team, and the policy area that I oversee is the environment. I'm going to give a quick presentation today on this topic of the environment and Ofgem's perspective. I'll cover 3 things. Just firstly, our role as the regulator, then the regulatory tools that we apply for environmental policies, and then just lastly, kind of where we are now and how we think innovation and third parties can get involved. So firstly, if we could just jump onto the first slide there, thank you. So Ofgem is the energy regulator. Our role within network price controls is to set the right regulatory framework with a balance to ensure that networks have the allowances that are directly linked to what we need the networks to achieve to ensure we see net zero targets being met. We develop a framework that ensures companies are both incentivised and remunerated in meeting net zero targets, and that package is underpinned through the Rio price control. I think it's important to state up front that what we're not. So we're not the environment regulator. It's organisations like BEIS, DEFRA and the Environmental Agency that set out any kind of new legislation, including, for example, a ban on materials that the networks use. We focus on setting that regulatory framework. The energy industry has a key role to play ensuring that we meet net zero targets, and we have a number of regulatory tools in our toolbox to enable this. However, for this session, we're going to focus on the requirement for network companies to have environmental action plans and what these mean. So I'll just go straight into that. So what are the environmental action plans? So through the Rio framework, we made it a requirement that all companies develop commitments, targets and deliverables to ensure that they reduce their environmental impact from their network itself. Why have we done this? Well, to ensure the network companies take responsibility for their impacts and to support GB's environmental objectives through transparent and comparable reporting on environmental performance. Crucially, we want to drive a coordinated and concerted approach to minimising and ultimately eliminating greenhouse emissions. And this was how are we doing that? And I think at that point, I'll just jump on to the next slide there, please. Thank you. So we've developed what is called the Environmental Action Plan, and it's essentially a reporting obligation and incentive for the companies to develop targets and initiatives against key impact areas which we have developed in Ofgem. These impact areas vary by network company, and this is not the full suite of impacts. However, I hope they provide the flavour of the expectations that we've set out through the price control period. So I'll just kind of rattle through a couple of them. Firstly, business carbon footprint. It's quite a broad impact area, and the companies have to set a target for when they will reduce their BCF within a trajectory of what is now 1.5 degrees warming following COP26, and that has to be accredited by the Science Based Targets Initiative. Quite a broad impact area, and it covers a number of different deliverables, but for example, decarbonising fleets and doing that in an economic and efficient manner, or reducing carbon emissions associated with the use of temporary generation when ensuring a reliable network. Kind of secondly, SF6, that kind of harmful gas used in switchgear. We want the networks to take efficient actions to reduce leakage and also to reduce its usage within the networks. This is more of a kind of electricity specific issue, and probably most prevalent at the transmission level, but is key that over the next 10 years we begin to see that being removed from the system in line with kind of potential new statutory obligations. And nextly, losses / shrinkage for the gas side. Again, expectations to find innovative solutions to drive down losses and shrinkage in light of when we expect them to increase through low carbon technology uptake. And then kind of the last three around embodied carbon, supply chain management and biodiversity and natural capital. Again, looking to get kind of ambitious targets to set against these three with very different scopes. However, what's kind of key amongst these impact areas is really how do we take account for emissions that are inherently difficult to measure, identifying the tools to monitor and embed that within these targets is a challenge, and we don't have kind of confident tools across these areas to make sure that we can to monitor and manage these emissions across the networks. And then lastly, I shouldn't forget kind of resource use and waste, and this is all about identifying innovative solutions and setting targets to both reduce waste and minimise usage as well. I suppose kind of in conclusion of where we are now and how innovators can get involved. So across transmission and gas and electricity distribution, we're kind of at different points within the setting of the price controls. But for transmission and gas, the companies have now received their allowances to deliver their EAP targets, and they've got the challenge of ensuring they meet those targets and report on them publicly, whilst also kind of maintaining reliability and security of the network, amongst many other things. I think how can innovators get involved? And that kind of question was likely to be well answered by Carolyn, Mark, and Cadent this afternoon. But kind of noting their specific concerns and opportunities within their network. However, I think none of these impact areas are going to be an easy fix, and we're really keen to get fast and ambitious targets to make sure we can meet these net zero commitments. And there's a need to be coordinated and consistent across the industry. There are many examples, I think, within the impact areas listed on that slide, and hopefully the teams across the networks will be able to take you through where they see challenges and opportunities within their networks. I think that's kind of everything from Ofgem, but I welcome any questions towards the end of the session.
Brilliant, thanks, Eilidh. That's set the transmission and distribution networks up well, so thank you for that introduction and context. Carolyn, can we come to you then next to talk about what you're doing within the transmission electricity?
Of course you can. Hi everybody, I'm Carolyn and I work in National Grid Electricity Transmission. Thanks so much for having me here. Yeah, before I get started about actually how we're implementing kind of our environmental action plan, I just thought I'd give you a quick introduction about who we are. So we are part of the National Grid Group, but today specifically I'm representing electricity transmission. So we are responsible for owning and maintaining kind of the high voltage electricity transmission in both England and Wales, and so we kind of connect new sources of renewable generation at source and then kind of transport that back into the distribution owners, who then kind of provide it to kind of end consumers at the line. But yeah, so we serve only England and Wales, and there's other transmission owners in Scotland. So if we just go into the next slide, please. So if I then go more specifically around our environmental commitments, so Eilidh did a really good introduction around kind of what the new environmental framework looks like from a regulatory perspective. Within National Grid Electricity Transmission, we did our business plans a bit earlier than the distribution networks. Ours were finalised in December of 2020. So it took us around 2 years approximately to kind of create our environmental action plan. And now this is now fully published on our website. This was launched in April of this year, April 2021. So if you go on our website, hopefully you should find this quite easily. But yeah, so that kind of the output of that big piece of work around kind of looking at new policy, new stakeholder expectations, kind of new standards and kind of crises has kind of led us to produce this plan. And really, in very simple terms, is one plan is got 25 environmental commitments, and that's split into 4 different areas. So one is net zero carbon emissions, so really focusing around what we're doing around scope 1 and 2 and 3. How do we minimize waste and sustainable use of resources, once caring for the natural environment, and how we lead the way. So if you just jump into the next slide, I can just kind of talk you through in a little bit more detail. Now, this is a really loaded slide, and I didn't expect everybody to kind of read through all our commitments here. But if I just took this in a kind of very high level. So in terms of kind of what we describe from a net zero carbon emissions, it's really around actually how do we become a net zero network? And that's following the principles of having science-based targets aligned to 1.5 degrees. So for ET, within the next 5 years, that is a 34% reduction in emissions, excluding losses. That is 33% reduction in SF6. So that plays a really big part of what we need to do in order to reduce it. Things like energy use, fleet and travel make a big part of it. But we also want to focus a lot around what we're doing around scope 3. So within the next 5 years, we're doing a lot of work to build new infrastructure projects to deliver 40 gigawatts by 2030. We want to ensure that we do deliver that in the most sustainable way. So we've made a really ambitious commitment to deliver carbon neutral construction by 2026. That is really ambitious. We do need to demonstrate that we're going to be reducing emissions in the next 5 years, and we would only offset residual emissions. So we've done a lot of work in Rio T1 actually to kind of have the right tools and processes in order to drive reduction. But I think innovation still has to play a really big part. And I think this is an area where I think as innovators, we do need more help to understand new technologies, new, more sustainable alternatives, and different tools that we can capture better carbon data, because that is a challenge in itself. Really quickly, in kind of the minimizing waste and sustainable use of materials, again, we're building a lot more infrastructure, so we do need new materials like steel, aluminium. So we want to ensure that actually we use these materials sustainably. So we've kind of broken down our targets into 3 different areas. So one is construction. Obviously, construction waste is probably the most material aspect for us. Second of that is operations, kind of the waste that we produce in our substations, and then obviously looking at our offices. So we've kind of broken that into kind of 3 different layers. But we've also want to implement kind of good practice standards. One being kind of having a circular economy standard that we can follow, and then looking at our procurement processes to ensure that actually we're following best practice. The third element is caring for the natural environment. So again, we acknowledge that we have a biodiversity crisis. You know, there's probably a lot of focus at the moment around net zero, but biodiversity actually contributes a lot to our net zero emissions. And actually, as networks, we can really lead the way with some of these things. So within ET, we are a big landowner. So it's actually how do we look at our non-operational estate and ensure that actually we're enhancing that piece of land. We're creating new, better ecosystems so that biodiversity can thrive. And again, when we're doing construction, actually, how do we stop not just reducing our impact on the environment, but actually providing kind of enhancements to that, so kind of becoming nature positive. So we have commitments around 10% again on that. And again, we kind of committed to that 2 years before legislation. So the environmental bill has come out this year, and that means that in 2023, new DCO projects will have to embed that. We've done that 2 years ahead of time. But again, we probably need some help from innovators around, doing this innovatively, doing this either in our own land or apart from that, and actually what new systems or processes we can embed that to actually out-deliver on this target, because we just don't want to just achieve it, we do want to out-deliver it. And then the last bit I just wanted to mention, which is our kind of leading the way area, is around internal accountability. So we want our senior leaders to be accountable for these commitments. We want to have an engaged workforce. We know that we're not going to achieve these targets unless we've got an engaged workforce that cares about these commitments. But we also want to do more work externally with other networks, with our suppliers, to ensure that actually we're doing this together, and that we can lead the way together with some of our environmental commitments. So hopefully that provides a very high level picture of what we do. But yeah, there's 25 commitments in there with a lot of work, and that needs to be done in the next 5 years in order to deliver.
Thanks, Carolyn. It is really interesting, because when you think of transmission network, you don't think of you being about having big land and estate assets. So it's really interesting when you talk about biodiversity crisis. So hopefully we'll get into a bit more about this in the Q&A. So Moving on to Mark Norman, who works for UK Power Networks. Handing over to you, Mark.
Thank you. So my role with UK Power Networks is I'm very much on the operational side. There are two sides really to, if you think about carbon and environmental management and biodiversity and sustainability. And one is the main side is obviously facilitating net zero. So that's everything we do to ensure that the distribution network can accommodate, the decarbonisation of power, low carbon heat, electrical vehicle infrastructure. And then the other side of it, of course, is our own backyard, our own operational footprint, the impact we have on the environment from the construction work that we undertake to the fleet that we have to, drive out our staff use to drive around the network, to the waste we produce, to the energy we consume for our own operations. So I think it's important we do get our own backyard right. And I think what you've seen from Ofgem and Caroline today shows the sort of direction, the theme that's going in. And what you'll see is our plan is very similar. But UK Power Networks is the distribution network operator. And to put that crudely, we are the bit that sits below the pylons that you see on the landscape, right up to the meter in your house. So we're responsible for that regional distribution network. And we're based in the southeast, and we're 3 DNOs, and they are very very different sort of characteristics in each DNO. Some are much more urban, some are much more rural. So, the Eastern Power Networks is a much more rural network. London, as you would imagine, is a much more densely populated urban network. And that we distribute close to 71,000 gigawatt hours of electricity, which is 28% of the UK's total. And we're serving, nearly a third of the UK population with 190,000 kilometres of underground cable and overground cable to maintain. So it's not a small undertaking, and it's obviously quite critical that we manage that network as effectively as we can, at the best cost to the customer. If you can move to the next slide, please. So what does our plan cover? Well, our plan's been divided into sort of 4 key areas. It pretty much follows what you've just seen from Caroline. It follows what's required from Ofgem. But those 4 pillars really are carbon, resource use, pollution, and biodiversity. And while there's a strong focus on carbon, it's important to understand that all these things are interlinked. They're not independent of each other. From a carbon perspective, we were early adopters of the Science-Based Target Initiative because we thought it was important to have third-party scrutiny. And it's fair to say that our targets will only increase around that. So we have broad targets that cover everything from our losses, our operations, and through to our supply chain. And then we have much tougher targets on the things we directly control, such as our fleet, our temporary generators on the network, the energy in our properties, and the auxiliary energy that we use to power our substations. And they will continue. That trajectory can only really increase. The more we do now, the easier it will be later. And I think the challenges really are around carbon are, for us, from an operational perspective, I'm just thinking about our own footprint, is the fleet, it's the temporary generators. They are tough nuts to crack. And if I move to resource use and waste, then yes, everyone will have recycling targets, but the key bit there really for us is the sort of circular economy piece. It's not about mine it, make it, distribute it, buy it, use it, and dump it. It's about actually reducing the materials that we're using on a daily basis. If you consider the scale of what's needed to, improve the networks, to deliver low carbon heat, EV infrastructure, and upgrade and make the networks more resilient, there's a lot of potential material in there. So it's about being smart with that and understanding how can we build it better? Can we build it more efficiently? Do we need to build it? Anticipating that demand and matching that demand, not building ahead of need. So there's, again, that will tie back into things like the supply chain and embodied carbon. And when we talk about the supply chain, our suppliers are critical to us. Just about every company out there will find that if they have a footprint, their carbon, that actually their supply chain, their scope 3 emissions is a large part of their footprint. And as a consequence, therefore, you're going to have to work in partnership with your suppliers who are also tackling the same problems. So it's very much about partnership. It can't be, parent-child relationship. We've got to work together. There are things that our suppliers are bringing to the table that are already making us think about how we operate and the way that we purchase and the way that we do, and vice versa as well. So we're looking to build strong partnerships really with our suppliers. We're looking for innovative solutions on key problems, whether that's fleet, temporary generators, scheduling of vehicles, all that sort of stuff. And if I move to sort of the air quality and the pollution side of it, then yes, we've got a strong ethos there about preventing pollution. But it's also tackling things that are perhaps unseen as well. So, air quality. And I think it's important that we do talk and address air quality because it's tied back into the carbon targets. If we don't burn diesel, then by definition, we don't produce NOx. So, you know, I think when you're trying to deliver benefits from a supply chain perspective for us, it's about being able to identify those stack benefits as well. It isn't just the carbon, it's an operational saving, it's more efficient, and it also reduces air pollution. It's going to get a lot more traction in any business, whoever you are and however you're regulated. So it's making sure we identify those things. And if we move to sort of the biodiversity side of affairs, we aren't large landowners per se. We don't have large tracts of land, but we do have lots of patches of land. And there's a lot we can do in small spaces, and they can range from, you know, a garage sized footprint right up to a football pitch sized footprint. And there's much that we can do at a very basic level from a biodiversity perspective. And there's, you know, a great deal we can do just operationally as well in terms of the way that we manage and mow those sites, in terms of how we manage the hedgerows. There's a lot of benefit to that. But again, that does tie back into carbon, because there's potential carbon sequestration there as well. And I think, you know, as Caroline said, there is a biodiversity crisis, so it's not something that we should ignore. So small changes can have big impacts in the way that we operate there. So hopefully that gives you a flavour really of the plan. The plan is very new. It was published last week. We're still yet to finish all our determinations with Ofgem, which will be happening over the next year. But if you want to see what DNOs are doing, then if you, for example, if you Google ukpowernetworks.co.uk or put ED2 plan or Google that, you should find your way to our plans, and you can see in more detail there what's going on. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And just to reiterate, we will put stuff on our website and circulate it around to all the people that have registered, and so they'll have all the information and links that they'd need. So moving on then to Cadent's perspective. So Cadent is the largest GDN in the country, and Dave is going to talk to us about what they're up to in terms of environment and innovation. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, thank you, Denise. So yeah, I may well repeat some of the similar kind of themes to what Carolyn and Mark have talked about in their kind of businesses. But first I'll give you a little bit about Cadent generally. So like Denise said, we've got 11 million consumers and homes and businesses throughout the, I guess, predominantly Northwest, West Midlands, East of England and North London. The bit I kind of want to call out is, look, we recognise we deliver or we transport a fossil fuel, which is the enemy, I guess, in everything we're doing from a carbon footprint perspective. So we absolutely recognise that fossil fuel is part of the problem and not part of the solution. We need the low carbon heating technologies to be deployed across our networks and beyond. So yeah, 11 million consumers, about 6,000 employees, and 132,000 kilometres of pipes across our regions. So yeah, largest distribution network, but very much in the middle of the UK, and yeah, crossing over some of the other areas we've talked about as well. The main, I guess, promise of this, so this graphic is actually from part of our kind of website resources. So yeah, there's all sorts of elements on there around our green print, our hydrogen 10-point plan, lots of resources around what we're doing with regards to hydrogen. So obviously that's part of our kind of biggest piece of work that's progressing from in Northwest, but also looking at there's an East hydrogen piece that's recently kind of being progressed now as well. So moving on to the next slide, please. So similar to what the other guys have talked about is we've got obviously part of our business plan, 21 to 26, that obviously we agreed through the final determinations with Ofgem, is broadly around four commitment areas. So predominantly, so one is a reduction in leakage from our network. So like I said, the fossil fuel that's in our network, we want to keep in there. So obviously we've got huge commitments around reducing that leakage from our network, and very much aligned to the shrinkage aspects that Eilidh talked about as well. CO2, so carbon neutral operations by 2028, so not quite in line with what Carolyn said about, I think, 2026, but yeah, some significant commitments there. And the biggest part or part of that, which is something that actually I'm program managing in the team, is around our zero emissions emergency response vehicles across the region. So we made the commitment to Ofgem to get all of our, what we call our FCOs, our first call operatives, into electric or zero emissions vans, I should say. Predominantly may well be electric, but we're going to look at hydrogen ones as well. That becomes a big part of that. HyNet, obviously the hydrogen activities that are ongoing in the northwest of our region, yeah, significantly impacting the kind of to decarbonise not just the northwest now, I guess, but other areas as we go as well. And then the last one there is around clean gas, so enabling our network capacity for greener resources, so whether it's biomethane injections and those kind of things as well. So I guess making sure that we have the life cycle of reusing and reducing waste. So the next slide. So yeah, so a bit more detail on what's in our environmental action plan. So I haven't got a fancy graphic there, but it's, I guess, straightforward bullet points. So through several key initiative areas. So obviously the ongoing mains replacement activities. So that look, we're duty bound to replace what 1900 kilometres per year through the mains replacement process from an Ofgem and an HSE perspective. Obviously that has a massive impact on reducing the leakage of methane, contribute to our air quality and the GHG emissions bits that again we mentioned earlier. Like I've said, rollout of zero emissions vehicles for our emergency fleet. So there's two main aspects there, obviously to improve the air quality and reduce that impact of emissions. And that's something that's being progressed now. Reducing spoil from excavations, again, similar to what the other guys have said, but we dig a lot of holes, we fill in a lot of holes. We need to make sure that's managed in the most responsible way. So making sure we're reusing spoil and things where necessary, and making sure we're pushing it into the appropriate recycling facilities as needed. Reducing the use of single-use plastics in both offices and from our depots. So yeah, linked to the top bit, we put plastic into the ground to make our gas network safer. That's not without its challenges of every single fitting that we put in the ground probably comes in a plastic bag. We need better ways to not have that. We need them in a plastic bag to stop the contamination and things like that through transport. So there's some of the key areas that we are looking for, I guess, for innovations on. Right, well, what do we wrap the fittings in if we're not putting them in a plastic bag to keep them clean? And obviously the waste generation, improving waste management, all our depots and obviously our main sites as well. So yeah, making sure we're putting the right things in. We've also, I guess, linking back to the discussion on supply chain, we've recently let new contracts for our mains replacement work and other construction activities. We've layered that through the contracts to make sure that those sustainability targets are linked back through the contractual targets down to the look from a Cadent perspective. It's a lot of the subcontractors and the like, which are a lot smaller companies than Cadent and our other partners, that we need to support. Part of that, we've kind of linked them all back into the sustainability school, which is part of our kind of commitments as well. So hoping to give them the support as smaller organisations, the opportunities to improve their own waste management activities. And then the last bit, which again has come up twice already, is the biodiversity impact on our sites. Look, we've got lots of above ground installations and other gas governor sites around our network that we need to manage appropriately. So whether that's managing the cutting of the grass or the pruning of the trees and all of those kind of things, we need to make sure we're doing that in the right way, and looking at how do we create that biodiversity at all those sites. So so that's, I guess, it for myself, Denise, and pass back to yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That's really helpful. It was quite interesting because you go from hydrogen at the one end and massive decarbonisations that you've all talked about, and then we talk about single-use plastics, and it goes to show the level of innovation that's needed right across to achieve, net zero is massive. So we do need all brains coming to bear on this. Dave, just to come back, have you got an example of where an innovation has already been used or deployed, or you're supporting in this area at the moment?
I guess it's probably on those single-use plastics. I think that the teams are looking at various different methods of making sure we can get the fittings and things like that to the right places, but in the right thing. So I guess one bit that has come up, and it's probably PPE rather than fittings, but we've kind of worked with our suppliers to basically supply us with the PPE, but not in the plastic packaging, not in the things like that. So it might seem it's not a big innovation or a big thing of sorts, but every little helps, as they say on the supermarket advert. So it's looking at a lot of those smaller bits to maximise it. Yeah, the big volume generally. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, but every little helps. And so, Mark, because you talked about the challenges you were facing, what's the toughest challenge that you face in decarbonising operations, do you think?
I think, to be fair, it's the same as it is for everyone else. It's change. It's not so much the technologies. You know, in many instances, maybe the technologies already exist, but we've got to change design. We've got to change mindset. You know, both externally and internally as well. You know, in terms of the operationally large challenges, then fleet is going to be a tough nut to crack. You know, so will the temporary generators. They're not easy to fix. You know, they're a necessity. We don't have them for the fun of it, but everyone's facing the same challenge. So you know, we see the supply chains gearing up to be able to help us meet that. That brings costs down. People's confidence grows in the technology that we're using, or the fuel, or the type of vehicle. But again, I'll go back to it isn't just the type of it isn't just the vehicle and the technology, is it? I need to look at why are we using that van? Do we need that van? Can it be a car? Can it be something smaller? Can we do it differently? You know, it's those sort of questions as well. It's one of those qualitative pieces.
So what are you looking then for? What would you talked in your speech about the supply chain? What are you looking for from the supply chain, or innovators or third parties? How can they contribute?
I think it is, you know, I said earlier, it's not just us saying to them, this is the target, meet it. You know, it was about what can you bring to us? What have you already brought to us that we may have, you know, asked you to put on the back burner? Not just technology, but different processes as well. I think when I talk about circular economy, you know, we've already discussed all the sort of things. We're all trying to deal with those single-use plastics, but again, it's about, can I do it differently? If I'm using low carbon concrete for plinths, as an example, which are precast off-site, as an example, you know, there's savings there, isn't there? It might cost a bit more, but there's savings in shuttering and time on site and all the materials that, you know, had to be sort of carted in. So that might mean that we, just, you know, throwing this out, it might mean that we would then need to change the way that perhaps we order and the way that we operate. So it's just understanding from our supply chain about where you think you can help us. And what you think we might need to change as well internally. And you know, our procurement teams are working on that now. You know, we work with the supply chain school as well. And it's really important. It's not just about us. We don't want to leave the small suppliers behind. We want to work with you as well. We want to support you. We're not here to say here's a high bar, and if you can't get over it, you can't work with us. You know, we want to work that through in partnership, get everybody on board and everybody pointing in the same direction.
It's quite interesting when you talk about partnership and collaboration, because that's so what the EIC is all about. I suppose, Carolyn, asking you really about, so how do you see, so there's collaboration, isn't there, with stakeholders, so, and your stakeholders could include the DNO, so how far do you see collaboration and working with other stakeholders helping you, you know, achieve your parts of your sustainability strategy?
Yeah, I think, collaboration is really interesting. And actually, we actually did a bit of a review on Monday with my team because all the DNOs kind of published their targets. So we had a bit of a session. What targets do they have that we don't have? And, you know, is someone doing something faster, further, you know, quicker? So we did that bit of a review. And actually, you know, Mark, from your perspective, I think you've got some really ambitious commitments around kind of circular economy and having a tool. And I think some of the other DNOs are committing to some things faster. So I think there's probably a lot more that we can do as networks to talk with each other and understand actually someone's doing something faster and better, like can we learn from each other and understanding. And actually from a transmission perspective, we're doing a lot of work already around embodied carbon and kind of net gain. So we're looking to kind of get kind of cross-sector methodologies that we can all kind of approve on and use so that there's consistency across. Because also if you look at suppliers and innovators and we're all asking for something slightly different, I don't think it helps the market. So I think the better and more consistent we all are as kind of networks and sectors, I think that helps. But I think there's something around kind of sharing more around what we're committed to. So I think some sessions like today is really interesting, but we do need to talk more. I think sometimes, you know, we are all guilty of being in a little bubble and kind of having our commitments in place, and we'll work on that. But I think the more that we talk about the challenges that we face, there might be someone that actually has the solution. So maybe, you know, let's continue talking and let's continue collaborating. I think that's really critical.
And I think, you see, because as you all know, your suppliers and the innovators work across all. And so it is about how we are spending energy customer money and all the rest of how we work together too. So we talk about having an innovator community, and it's an innovation capability. So it's how you guys come together to set that capability to work. And we need to be clear about what it is, how we work together and what it is we're looking for. So Eilidh, have you thought, so just in terms of this collaboration point and allowing third parties in, why is Ofgem pushing that?
Yeah, I mean, these issues are kind of ones that we're facing across whole society, not just unique to networks. I think they're just, as you said, these be a huge kind of collective push to meet net zero targets and share and socialise learnings and innovation and information. I think as the team has said, there's a multitude of challenges to resolve in the environmental action plans, and I don't think any can be considered a simple fix. I mean, just to kind of pick up on a few, you know, identifying alternative solutions to harmful gases and fluids, that's key across the whole industry. Supply chain, and when we set a requirement that 80% of suppliers need to be meeting environmental codes, so it's that kind of sustainability is considered throughout the chain. You know, managing waste effectively. I think we've all kind of picked up on just how do you account for things that can't be accounted for currently, and kind of measuring that impact, and that is inherently difficult and challenging to do within things like natural capital and biodiversity. So I think we need to identify opportunities to digitalise information impacts, so that can be kind of monetised and accounted for, but then for that to be shared so we can integrate that science into economic models. It needs to be a collective push, not just from one network or another.
I suppose obviously what innovators are always looking for is, so it's the what, isn't it? So we'll talk about in the macro scale about what the themes are, what our challenges are, but obviously smaller businesses are looking on to how do they hook onto something granular where they can get involved. And I guess a question probably to Carolyn and Dave maybe about, so are there new tools and techniques that you're looking to and challenges that you could be a bit more granular in sharing today?
Yeah, I think, tools and systems. I think actually that is something that we've been really focusing on. So we got obviously this new commitments, and we are tracking a lot of data, both internally and what we get from our contractors. And what we have found to try and actually get good baselines and get good quality data, actually the systems that we have in place are probably not fit for purpose. So, you know, when we're asking contractors to fill in their carbon data, to fill in the waste data, I think sometimes the challenge that we face is that actually they're probably not easy to use, and that's why they're not filling in the data. And therefore we spend a lot of time as sustainability professionals chasing that data rather than focusing on what could be improved. So actually having a good system portal in place that actually captures data quickly, efficiently, for everybody in the industry, I think that's really critical, because then we can spend more time actually, we understand what's going on, how can we improve it? So I think that is one thing that I think we are finding challenging at the moment, just having the right systems. I think in terms of tools, I think it's just understanding actually what is good practice in the industry as well, in terms of actually more sustainable options. So for example, I think all of us here as networks want to get out of diesel generators. So we did a bit of work around actually what is the alternative, you know, what has the lower global warming potential. So I think it's just understanding actually what is out there in the market a little bit better. And I don't know if that can be done effectively, but it's something that obviously we're being proactively looking at, but just understanding there's better ways of doing things out there. Obviously, it has to be cost effective, but just having a better understanding of what's going on in the market, again, just really useful.
Oh, Carolyn, thank you. And from an EIC perspective, these for us is that I just think, well, there's a call waiting to happen, because one of the calls that we do, and many innovators will know this, is our job is to take your challenges and help you articulate it so people who don't know the industry can connect. So, Dave, what does that resonate with you, what Carolyn was just saying? Oh, I've got something completely different up the sleeve.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's all about getting down to the certainly we call them local government partners in our, but yeah, some of these partners and contractors they're small scale, so we're trying to build them up, but getting them to fill in a simple form or something like that can be quite complex. So we're having to kind of support them through that, I guess. So anything that would support that would be good. The other bits, I guess, just looking specific to one thing we're doing. So we're obviously pressing towards zero emissions for some of our fleet. Some of the things that have come up on that was, well, what happens if there's a power cut and we've got EVs everywhere? So they're kind of real things that have come up in the last few weeks. And equally, if we will have an incident of some kind on the gas network at some point. Again, how do we make sure we're equipped for that? So if we've got someone in an electric vehicle in London that we need to get to the northwest, then we've got huge reliance on the kind of public infrastructure there. So if there are any kind of, there may well be calls we need to engage back with yourself, Denise, on some of these to kind of think, well, actually, what's out there that can. We know there's a hydrogen generator, like a big kind of welfare unit generator, kind of things that can support. So, but yeah, a couple of areas that are close to what we're looking at.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And Mark, have you got anything you want to add? Because it is this granularity that people are looking for. So what is it that we can, I mean,
I'd agree with everything that's been said there. We've got exactly the same issues. They're not different. They're the same. I think what sometimes we're maybe not aware of is that if we make a change in terms of what we're ordering or what we're asking for, or whether that's a new type of fuel, is sometimes we're unaware that the supplier will say, you're a big customer of mine. If you make that change, that will enable me to make that same change for the rest of my client base. We're not often aware of that. We don't always know. And if you can sort of help that change happen across those scope 3 emissions, it makes the case for moving to that much stronger. So I think it's areas like that as well on a sort of the macro scale. On the lower scale, I think I feel the pain on the collation of data, the reporting of it. It's having an efficient tool, but I think having been on the other side of the fence as well, there's nothing worse than having to report the same things to 6 different customers in 6 ever so slightly different ways. It's just time consuming when that time could be better spent getting on with your day job. So I think anything we can do to help smooth that with our supply chain as well, and with yourselves, and in terms of just making that reporting flow a bit more smoothly, and just remembering the sort of 80-20 rule. We're not trying to measure every screw, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. We really are trying to measure what's material. So that helps as well.
And I think you're right about an 80-20 rule. That's really important, because that's not what we've been, as an energy industry, we've been very exacting for all good reason, but the 80-20 rule, especially in this, when we're driving so hard in so many different areas, is hugely important. So I suppose you touched on this, I guess, before. Can you just say a little bit more about the macro point you were making? Have you got an example of, where you were saying about if you change, then it helps? First point you made.
I mean, if I took a fuel, for example, and you might have a supplier who provides you with your temporary generators, because you can't own them all, and they could move to a different fuel, a lower carbon fuel, and they can do that, but you got to remember they may only have 1 or 2 or 3 distribution centres. So you might want to do it, and you still might be a reasonably large customer for them, but they're not going to be able to do that unless you come on board with them and say, I'll do it, I'll commit to that, and then they can provide it to their other customers. The smaller customers can't get that because they're not going to change for the small customer, but they will change for a big customer. And I think if we can identify where that makes a difference, and that could be further down the sort of tier 2, tier 3 supply chain, we can start to make those changes more quickly, and then it brings the cost down as well. But sometimes we don't know that. We don't know that our decision could have a big ripple effect across the whole industry.
And I guess then you need, it is back to that open dialogue about third parties or innovators who see that opportunities coming to you and saying, this is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is very much about people seeing that we are open to new ideas and open for business, really. Innovation business anyway. So we have got, Eilidh, Ofgem is known for providing innovation funding incentives, and I suppose be helpful to understand how you see those incentives playing out and supporting the industry in delivering on these environmental action plans.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things there. I mean, as I said, the EAPs are the environmental action plans. Sorry, using acronyms, it's like a different language. Are kind of baseline funded. The networks have been funded to deliver those against those targets. In the case of national grids, we do have a financial incentive to deliver against more specific targets and around these impact areas. Separately, we do have, in addition to that kind of reputational incentive which the environmental action plans deliver, we do have innovation funding. I see those quite standalone because the environmental action plans really drive at the impact their own network creates on the environment. The innovation activities is kind of a ring-fenced funding for activities that networks might not otherwise do, and kind of are targeted and linked to that bigger net zero related challenges that are posed on the energy networks, such as, you know, heat and transport, and those are kind of just to reference the names if you want to go look them up, or the Network Innovation Allowance and the Strategic Innovation Fund, and are kind of managed in different ways by Ofgem. But I suppose, yeah, to kind of answer your question, Denise, the networks have the funding available to meet the targets and try to do that in an economic efficient way, and then separately we do have innovation funding as well.
And I guess this is because I know it's quite new, isn't it, the Strategic Innovation Fund? So we're just working that through now. But it is, as I understand, it is open to third parties to come forward with ideas. But those third parties would need support from network businesses to take that forward, to get some funding. And I guess the focus of that isn't, there's themes, aren't there? So some of those are around net zero. So net zero might actually connect with some of the environmental changes, the bigger macro changes that we're talking about potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Strategic Innovation Fund is kind of controlled by Ofgem, but it's focused on those kind of strategically important innovation areas that focus on net zero. So quite a big bucket there. And it's in partnership with other public bodies, Innovate UK, and yeah, so absolutely there are opportunities there as well.
So I guess, and so for anybody listening, if there's any queries, that is the EIC, that's what one of our jobs is there to do, is help you navigate this. So if you do have ideas, I'd say do come to us and to the networks, you know, with any of these ideas, and we will help you and support you in the development of those ideas. Can I just come back to biodiversity? And because it's quite an interesting one that people wouldn't naturally think that was an issue for network businesses. Now I know there's different scales, so obviously coming to you, Carolyn, for National Grid transmission, have you got an example of the sorts of smaller companies or innovators that wouldn't necessarily see themselves as being able to partner or support National Grid that you might be trying to reach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two things. So we got two commitments around the biodiversity area. So one is around kind of the use of our non-operational land. So we have a tool at the moment that measures natural capital. And again, that is kind of providing a financial measure to those ecosystem services that we have. And I think that's in line with kind of the UK's government's 25-year environmental plan, is actually, you know, putting a measure around what we have. So one of the things that we're working at the moment is actually we're looking for a tool that provides a consistent measure with the Scottish TOs. So obviously we have challenges in England and Wales that is quite different to Scotland. And we want to measure ecosystem services in the same way. So actually we're looking for a tool at the moment that provides that consistency. So that's one of the ways where we're looking for outside partners to help us deliver that. That is one example, but we're also working with consultancies to actually provide us with some insight around how we can deliver enhancements in a cost-efficient way. So, for example, we use existing consultants. It doesn't mean that actually we can see that a bit more innovatively or a little bit differently. So I think we're always open to kind of new ideas, and similar with net gain as well. So if we have an impact on kind of, if we've got some construction work and we have an impact on the land, we'll be looking to kind of develop enhancements on that piece of land, but we're also looking for other partners where if we can't do it in that operational land, we can do it somewhere else. And again, it's just kind of creating kind of those ideas of what we can do differently than what we were thinking before. But I think definitely tools is one, and just again, kind of that cost efficient. How do we provide enhancements in a cost efficient way that protects consumers? there's just so many open ideas that we can do, and I think we have one way of working, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't look for other ways that's more innovative.
So yeah, we definitely need to do some horizon scanning, don't we? Collaborative horizon scanning to see what's out there. So no, Dave and Mark, from your business's perspectives, I know maybe smaller for UKPN. I'm saying that, but then you have massive rural areas. So just interesting about anything you want to add on biodiversity? You can say no.
I was just going to say, I guess similar to what Karen's, but yeah, we work with companies like Wildlife Trust to kind of to look at seeing, well, how are there particular areas where we've got sites that are kind of, I don't know if it's particular endangered kind of species or things like that. But yeah, that's probably one area I'm aware of.
Right.
I think, yeah, I mean, I'd agree with everything that's been said around the tools that you can use and how they're consistent and how you report them. But I guess sort of, you know, down to the roots and spade level, I think it's you know, if I don't have to do a hard dig and I can do a soft dig, you know, and there's any innovation around that, well, there's massive embodied carbon save is there and material. But you know, one of the big issues for us is protecting roots and things like that. So anyone who works in those sort of areas and has techniques or equipment that can help us with that in the future when people have planted things over the top of stuff, you know, that's quite useful. I think it's you know, we talked about partnerships as well. Well, you know, if it's biodiversity net gain and it's an official, you know, through a planning consent, it's how it's managed going forward. So it's those partnership opportunities really with the Wildlife Trust, landscape ecologists, that sort of stuff, to say this isn't your typical way you manage it, it needs to be managed like this. So we're going to need to work with people to do that. And then I think sort of finally it's, you know, within that supply chain through people's experience, you know, what can we do to change to improve biodiversity by default? So, you know, we all have to do reinstatement work that may or may not fall under the biodiversity net gain regime. It may or may not fall under all the other stuff that we have to report to. But what are the small changes we could make there? And we have ideas, but obviously our supply chain does. And if I think about, you know, the way local authorities have approached parks in the last 10 years, you know, they don't mow them to within an inch of their life. They've actually turned a lot of them into meadow grass. They're still really attractive amenity sites, but they're great from a biodiversity perspective. And they've saved money in the cost of having to mow it all the time. So it's not always have to cost us money. It just has to be, it could be a change, you know, in the way that we operate that we've perhaps not thought of.
And it is those ideas, isn't it? Not just innovative ideas as opposed to innovative tools and techniques. So no, that's really, really valuable. Thanks, Mark. So just as we're coming to the end, but I wanted obviously one last question for each of you. If you had, Lord knows, a magic wand, what would you want to do first? What would you want to address first? So if I come to you first, Carolyn, what would you like to see happen first?
First, oh goodness. I think I'm focusing a lot of my time around this carbon neutral construction target. So yeah, I think, you know, as a business, we're still building very high intensive carbon materials. So if I had a magic wand, is, you know, how do we provide low carbon sustainable options for concrete, aluminium and steel? Those are kind of my three big topic areas. So we can, you know, we need to build a lot of stuff in the next 5 years, and how do we do that in the most sustainable way so that we don't rely so much on offsetting at the end? That's kind of my big topic area.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carolyn. Mark?
On just picking up on the offsetting piece, I think actually what, if I could wave a magic wand, is, yeah, everybody will have to resort to some offsetting, but that requires a proper price on carbon now. So if we could wave a magic wand and integrate that into everything we all do, whether we're a supplier or you know, us or the client, I think that would really help drive the right investment decisions now. Because if you kick the can down the road, it gets more expensive, and of course it gets more damaging. So, you know, a shadow price of carbon that we could all apply within our businesses would probably be really beneficial.
That'd be great. That is a magic one, but thank you, Mark. Dave?
It's probably around the use of our plastics. So we wrestle with a lot of PE, so polyethylene waste, at every site, at every depot. So I think that's probably one of the biggest areas that obviously work closely with our supply chain and partners. But yeah, that's an ongoing massive challenge for us. If we wanted to wave a magic wand, we'd say, right, we've got no skips in our in our depots that have got loads of yellow plastic pipes in, or fittings that haven't been used, or things like that. So it's probably the biggest focus.
Thank you. And Eilidh, just for you, not quite the same, but on your wish list, what would be top of your wish list?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I'm just running through all the impact areas again. What would I pick? We've spoken a lot about tools, and I think as a regulator, it's really important that we do have that consistent and comparable methodology. And for us, it's around those ones that we're struggling to take account for with embodied carbon, scope 3 emissions across the supply chain, biodiversity, those kinds of areas that kind of feel a bit untapped, and we don't really know the full impact yet and how we can incentivize and deliver against those.
Right. Well, that brings us neatly to 2 o'clock. How time flies. Listen, I want to thank all our panel, and thank you to those who've registered and listening. We know there's been some technical difficulties, but this is recorded, so we will be promoting this and sending out and contacting the registered guys directly. Just to say to those watching, if you want to see more of these sorts of webinars, please do give your feedback via the Innovator Insight Survey, because that then informs the work that the EIC does, that brings you closer to the very people we just heard about. And guys, that was really, really interesting, and we will come back to you as an EIC to work with you more closely to actually take forward some of the things that we've already said on the wish list. But again, thanks very much, and good luck to all of you with your environmental action plans. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks all.